meeting the session September 13th, Cannabis Oversight Committee. We call to order proceedings and roll call.
Yes, we will start first with non-voting members. Seat number 1, Department of Public Health, Mohammed Malhi.
Here.
Seat number 2, Police Department, Sergeant Sylvia Lane. Seat number 3, Department of Building Inspection, Stephen Plott.
Here.
Seat number 4, Planning Department, Matthew Chandler.
Present.
Seat number 5, San Francisco Unified School District, not present. Seat number 6, Entertainment Commission, Dylan Rice, not present. Seat number 7, Fire Department, Victor Wong, not present. We'll now continue with voting members. Seat number 8, Chair Ali Jamalian.
Present.
Seat number 9, Adam Hayes.
Present.
Seat number 10 is vacant. Seat number 11, Apollo Wallace.
Present.
Seat number 12, Drakari Donaldson.
Present.
Seat number 13, David Nogales Talley.
Here.
Seat number 14, Shay Gilmore.
Present.
Seat number 15 is vacant. Seat number 16, Antoinette Mobley. Present. With 7 of our voting members present, we have established this.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 1. Moving on to number 2, if you could read out the land acknowledgements.
4. The San Francisco Cannabis Oversight Committee recognizes that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 2. Moving on to general public comment. Members of the public may address the committee on topics that are not on the agenda today. I think we have a pretty packed agenda, so we're going to keep the public comment to 2 minutes per individual. With that, I would ask you to explain how to call in and give public comment. Thank you.
Fourth thing. For members of the public attending in person, please line up right here in front of this table if you would like to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. Looks like we have a member of the public here in person who'd like to make a public comment. Sir, if you just want to stand kind of close to the center of this open space right in front of the table. Right in the center, more to your left of the camera so that it can still catch that direction more. Keep going, keep going. Right in the center of the table. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Big steps. There you go, right there. That's perfect. Go for it.
You ready? My name is Bram Goodwin from the San Francisco Brownie Mary Democratic Club. I just wanted to thank you for being here and thanks for the agenda, especially on the public bank and also on the MMIC, which is on the agenda, which I appreciate. I wanted to comment that I came in on the Ed Judah this morning. And on the other track was another bus that had an ad. It said, big letters, is cannabis completely safe? As many of us know, unfortunately, San Francisco Public Health has been doing this kind of thing for the last couple of years periodically. They get money from the tobacco tax, basically, apparently, and use it. Well, I would just like to mention that what is completely safe that needs that kind of obvious tone of it's not safe. And I'd like to bring that up for your consideration to communicate to public health to please stop this. This has been going on for a long time. So my 2 minutes is probably up. I'll comment on the other things, but that just happened this morning. And I'd like to, bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do you have any comments online?
I see a hand raised. Checking the chat. I do not see anything in the chat. However, I'm going to request that this user unmute so that they can make their comment. User EB, you'll be unmuted momentarily. Feel free to make your public comment. EB, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello? Are you able to hear me? I'm unmuted.
Seems like this user
Can you hear me?
may not be aware how exactly to make public comment. EB, if you'd like to make a public comment, please begin speaking now. Otherwise, you will be muted and you are free to submit your public comment in the chat.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Okay, I'm going to mute this participant. With that, it appears that public comment is closed. I see no public comments remaining, Chair.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 3. Moving on to number 4, review of today's agenda. If there's any comments or changes you would request, that would be the time to do so. Please take a few minutes to review it, and then we'll take public comment before we make a motion to approve. Any member have any concerns with it? Otherwise, I open up for public comment. Can we open for public comment on today's agenda, please?
Yes, Chair. For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of this table if you'd like to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you'd like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494-753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is now open and I will read your comments aloud as they come in. We have no comments in person. And I see no hands raised in the chat and no chats coming in.
Thank you. We'll close public comment. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
I think. Thank you. Can we get a vote?
The motion to accept the agenda, the motion to accept the agenda as is, seat 8, Chair Jamalian, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 9, Vice Chair Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 10 is vacant. Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 12, Jakari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nogales-Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Aye.
With 7 ayes and 0 nays, the motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 5, reviewing and approving the minutes of our last meeting. You all got them, received them prior to the meeting. If we want to open up for public comment on this, then unless somebody wants to amend or review anything like that. We open for public comment.
Sure thing. For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of this table if you would like to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494 753-0648, and then press star 3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is now open and I will read your comments as they come in. It does seem like the individual trying to comment during general public comment is having some technical difficulties. I'm chatting with them. My apologies. I'm going to prompt them to unmute themselves again. Let's see if they can provide their public comment. EB, if you can still hear me, please feel free to press star 3 to unmute and begin your public comment. I want to give them a moment to see if it's just a technical difficulty. Hi, EB, can you hear us? You were just unmuted there for a moment. EB, can you hear us? Okay, it appears this individual is still having technical difficulty. Yes, you're not coming in on our end.
Hello?
I will chat with them directly and see if I can get them to just provide their
Do
public
we have
comment.
any other public comment?
No other public comment at this time,
That
Chair.
concludes public comment. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting
Motion to approve.
or a comment?
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Could we get a vote?
The motion to approve the meeting minutes from July 25th, 2023 as they are. Seat 8, Chair Jamalian, how do you vote? Seat 9, Vice Chair Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 12, Jafari Johnson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nogales Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Aye.
The motion passes with 7 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. That concludes item number 5, and most of our housekeeping now drops. Cannabis has some housekeeping issues, so I'll give the floor to yours, the chair.
Thank you. Scott, do I need to stand in
You
front of?
probably can stand right where your seat is. I don't think it'll get you all the way to the microphone.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like you're there, actually.
Well, I'm really happy I don't have to stand in front of you. So, it's very nice to see all of you. Thank you for coming. We're going to try something a little bit different moving forward with this iteration of the Media Oversight Committee. We're going to provide updates from the Office of Cannabis on a more regular basis. So this will include basic levels of information on permitting, grants, sort of things that we can report on regularly, but it'll also include one-off items as well. So today will be the inauguration of these updates. If you have any feedback or favorable items for how we incorporate these updates, it'll be a standing recurring. So the first is to provide an overview of where we are on the permitting side of things. Today, we have issued 46 permits. Those are Article 16 permanent permits. There are more permits than there are businesses. Scott will speak to this during the second presentation later. 46 permits have been issued to date. To put that into context, in 2019, we had 2 permits issued. In 2020, we issued 12, so at that point, there were 14. In 2021, there were 8 permits that were issued. 2022, there were 14 permits that were issued that year, and this year we're already at 10, and we anticipate that number to grow before the end. So if we just look at the trajectory that have increased, Scott will speak a little more about how we anticipate the numbers will continue to rise. But just want to provide that brief snapshot of where we are. 2023, we issued 10 permits so far. Of those 10 are for B. Well, let me rephrase this. 10 have been issued to BEAs. there's been one medical cannabis dispensary that's been converted from having a provisional permit into a permanent permit as well. So some good news on that front as well. Many of you might recall that it's taken the officers some time to get to our MCDs and our temp business operators. To date, we have begun processing all of the applications for permanent conversion with the exception of 7. So that means 94 applications from existing industry members are now being processed and are in various stages of the process. There are a decent number that are actually planning and further beyond. Like I said earlier, we anticipate the number of MCDs that are converted to grow over the course of the next couple of months. And in large part, that's because of work we've done with the planning department and the DPI to identify that some of the work that goes into converting can be expedited. So we hope to continue reporting that that is growing. One of the things that we have seen is some of the response rates on these applications. They're a little slower. We're hoping that they pick up. But we certainly understand that if it took us this long to start processing, it may take the applicant a little bit of time to get back on the information we're asking for. We're very happy to report 94 have been signed, at least 7 more before the entirety of the city industry is being processed by our office. Now, another piece that we heard from this committee, the last version of this committee, was working with the shop. So again, very happy to report that we have started interviewing the shop clock. We went through our queue, we identified the applications that were delayed. We identified there would be 23, that number is continually revised. Of those 23, we went through the shop clock. They responded. Of that 23, 12 were removed from the queue, either withdrawn or abandoned. So the shop clock is working and will continue to implement it in this time as we do products of our treatment. On the temporary permit side, many of you have brought this to my attention and we've done good pricing as well. But our temporary permit holders have been working with the fire department to come into compliance with some of the items that were first identified on their corrective action plans back in 2018. As many of you know, that has led to closure of some of those businesses. They're withdrawn, they're locations. That's ongoing. If you have any questions about specific numbers, Scott will be giving a recap of where we are in terms of the number of operational temporary permit businesses for 2022. I'm happy to provide more information. There was a question related to permitting fees. What are the permitting fees for someone who's applying for a cannabis business permit in San Francisco? It is $5,000 per year. If you're an equity applicant, that first year operational fee is waived. What that means is submit your application, go through the process, you're permitted. Your fee will not be due until the annual renewal. So you won't pay it when your permit is issued, you pay it the following year if you are equity applicant. One of the other changes that we worked on is aligning our payment processes with TPS. So now you're receiving a universal bill. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to explain the technical side of that. Just want to keep it moving forward. On the enforcement side, there are sort of 3 areas that we can report on. One, the number of compliance inspections we've conducted, 41 to date this year. Enforcement actions, 87 to date this year. And the number of complaints that we closed, so that includes complaints that were initiated in the previous year that we closed this year, it's another 66. So the enforcement arm of the office, the compliance arm of the office, doing a lot of work as well. We're talking about what these are the numbers speak to. Grants. So for any of you who are familiar with grants to work, we get a lot from the state. It sets the amount for a particular year. We come to the committee, we ask for recommendations, but based on those recommendations, we make distributions to eligible applicants or grantees. To date, about $10.5 million has been dispersed to equity applicants. And a portion of that has also been sent back to TA providers. The particular iteration that we're in right now, about 4.5 million, this committee provided recommendations. Per those recommendations, we split that disbursement into 2 rounds. The first round was to identify how many of the folks who were eligible would be able to meet a certain threshold. If they met that threshold, they would be eligible for reallocated round for the second. The first round of this current iteration closed at the beginning of June. At that time, when it closed, we had dispersed a little over $3.1 million. The average amount for an eligible applicant was a grantee was a little over $70 it was $70,877. What's really interesting about these numbers is there were 47 individuals who came to the city, went through the appropriate processes, registered, and became eligible to receive that allotment of $78,877. Of that, 45, so of the 47 who were eligible for that amount, 45 actually spent now 70% of their amount, meaning that they became eligible for the reallocation, which is what we're currently doing. That's where I'm speaking. The average reallocated amount at this point in time is a little under 17,000 per eligible grantee. The universal eligible grantee right now is 45. The total grantee distribution amount that's available in this period is around $750,000. We are currently in the process of distributing those dollars to the grantees that were eligible. Lots of numbers. Happy to take questions at this time. Angela?
Hi, good afternoon. So my questions, I have two. Are all new applicants issued a temporary permit initially?
Good question. They are not. So Scott will speak a little bit more about this. Give a little overview of how the review process works. But back when the application portal came in, there was a realization that there are folks that have been operating in this industry prior to Prop 64/2000. So for those individuals, they had already been operational. What do we do while they await permanent conversion? That Article 16 permit. At the same time, there was a prioritization for the city that if you were an equity applicant, you would be processed first. So it created this question of, you got these businesses that are already operating. How do you continue to let them operate while you're prioritizing these new applications submitted by equity applicants? And the resolution to that is that you would provide those existing industry members a temporary pathway to operate until they were converted. So when we use the terms temporary permits or NCDs, we're referring to those folks that were operational even before processing was passed. To answer your question, if you want to submit an application to the Office of Cannabis as someone who wasn't a part of that existing industry, you're submitting an application, you are not operational until you receive your permit. Different jurisdictions approach this problem a little differently. Some will allow you to temporarily operate, some will issue a permit, and then they become operational much later in the line. Here, it's really important that when you issue a permit, that business is ready to start being operational. So the answer to your question is, when you submit an application, you won't be operational until you receive a permit from us. Does that answer?
It does. One more question. Thank you. Then my other question is, so just, on the little report that we have here, right, the report.
I think that's the next agenda item.
Oh, okay, we're not there
We'll
yet.
get to that
Oh, okay, we're
on the
not there
next
yet, because
agenda item.
yeah.
I just want to point out, it's pretty impressive that the MCDs are getting processed. I think that's a huge milestone, so thank you. That's really big. On the enforcement front, obviously inspections are for licensees, but how much of this enforcement has been against illicit operators?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. When we refer to inspection, we're referring to compliance related items.
Right.
When we use the term enforcement, that is against the illicit industry.
Okay,
Or the, I wouldn't say.
so 66 enforcement actions, those would then be for the,
Actually, it's 87.
87,
So
okay.
87 enforcement actions are based on complaints that we received from the public or other operators saying, hey, we believe that this warehouse, this house, for instance, or this warehouse space in the Bayview, we believe that there is an illicit manufacturing operation. Will you go check that out? We'll respond to it. If we find more information, we'll run it off.
sure, they get cited, they have to abate or comply,
Well,
right?
and I'm glad you asked this question as well, because one of the things we have prioritized is working with our state partners more effectively to take action against these bigger illicit operations that we learn about, but may not have the tools readily available within our jurisdiction to take action against. So there, just in the last couple of months, there have been a handful of investigations that we partnered with the CCSF, and they've netted over 5,000 pounds of flour.
Oh, wow.
People have been detained.
And how many of these actions would, like, obviously, like the cultivation or manufacturing thing, but what about, is there other enforcements, events, sales parties, anything like that? Is there any, could you on a high level kind of just let us
Yeah.
know the
So-
different types of enforcement that the office has done?
Sure, it's complaint driven, right?
Sure.
Primarily complaint driven unless we, in our own investigations, identify something that's worth further. Typically, the breakdown of our enforcement actions based on complaints we receive, they're of illicit grows in larger warehouse spaces or residential areas. We also get calls about tent setups that are vending, that are selling retail and marketing goods around the world. And there we work with the police department to take action, to document it, to follow up. There are a decent amount of the complaints we receive either by phone or 311 are of that variety. I would say the overwhelming majority are illicit grows. And then occasionally we will receive information about practices that are being conducted with events, for instance, that are believed to be in violation of state and local code. We've taken measures to respond. We've reached out to those event organizers. We've explained to them that, hey, if this is something you're doing, you need to get a permit from the office, or you need to talk to the DA because what you're doing is not allowed. They're rarer, but when they do come in, we do follow.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise.
No, but I do have a comment about this conversation. I live in Baby Hunters Point. And I was wondering because there, oh boy, do we have street vendors? And the police enforcement came in. We were kind of happy about it. They began to kind of stake out at the place. These folks didn't go anywhere. And 4 or 5 days ago, everyone's gone. All the tents are gone, these vans are gone. There's no apparent pop-ups at that particular location. So I just wanted to make that statement because if people are phoning in, enforcement's working. And I'm very, very thankful for that because so many people have died right there. Like every week, twice a week, for months, on months end, we had murders. Twice a week at that very location. I'm not disclosing, but I'm just saying. So I'm just thankful for this enforcement piece and that it's working.
I really appreciate you saying that, and we certainly cannot take credit. for it.
Because safety is everything, you know?
For sure.
Thank
And
you.
we're very happy to have Lieutenant Lang here, who will introduce yourself.
Member Shea.
Could I just ask that we get, I'm glad that you're doing these updates. I think that's awesome for us for information. Could we get like, I don't know, slides or a one pager of all the numbers that you gave to, or is that,
I think, well, you can certainly get this information.
okay,
The sort of, why I was hesitating for a second is, we want to make these more routine. And we thought this speaking into it probably makes it a little easier to update regularly.
okay,
However, if you want follow-up, you can certainly reach out to our office.
okay. Yeah, what I'll probably do is like keep my own little list of like these numbers, because I want to make sure that like they make sense from meeting to meeting and I have like a, I don't know, better gauge of like what the numbers mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point. One of the reasons why we haven't done this so regularly is because these numbers don't change dramatically for me too. So when that is the case, we'll just acknowledge that there hasn't been traction and widespread activity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nikesh. Should we open to public comment?
Worthing? For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of this table in order to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide your public comment at this time. First option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494-753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. We do have one public commenter here in person. Please feel free to take the floor. You can do it from here. Just, yes, make sure you project.
Graham Goodman. A couple of items. One, I want to emphasize about our legacy medical cannabis retailers because many of us, I'm one of them, have used them from the start. And I just want to emphasize that they just, within legal bounds, deserve to be processed. And I'd like to see some real traction on it. You know, people can't come up with whatever they need, that's one thing, but I would really like to see some emphasis on this to clear this out and make them the 33 to 16 if appropriate. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I don't know if this is the right time, but as everybody knows, the possibility of the Schedule 1 to 3 has been out there and people have different opinions, which is great. I'd like to see some possible discussion today where appropriate in the item. Talk about this. At our Browning Mary meeting last night, we had a very vigorous discussion with lawyers and others about it. And I'd be curious whether, for example, at any of our, and it's all speculation, I get, but whether our state would be, our regulations would be affected, whether our Office of Cannabis would be affected in this kind of thing. So I also wanted to bring that up. I'll probably bring it up again at another maybe appropriate point in the agenda, but I'd like to see those 33 get to 16. I think they most of them deserve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment.
Virtual comments, anyone?
I do not see any virtual comments this time, Chair.
That concludes agenda item number 6. Moving on to the cannabis report. Very exciting.
Okay, just give us a moment. We'll set up here. Silence. Perfect.
I know. Impressive.
Are we gonna put on Oculus?
It's gonna be an immersive experience.
There, let's take a break.
I won't
I'll
warn you.
invite you to those that visual pro. I'll take it for you, show everybody.
I want to warn everyone, you're going to hear Scott speak for a very long time, so feel free to ask questions to break,
Yes,
to give him a break.
please, hold all napping until the end of the presentation.
Don't put on your radio, DJ boys.
Yes, I'll try to keep it a little more charismatic while I'm up here doing the presentation. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for virtual attendees for watching. This is going to be the first part of the annual cannabis report. This will be done in 2 parts. It is a fair bit of information. I would ask if you have just more general questions, you know, you want to talk, you want to hypothesize or talk generally about certain topics. Let's hold those till the end. If there's something that's on a slide specifically that's unclear or something that I've said that you don't quite understand or you want me to clarify that we're talking about at that moment, obviously feel free to just raise your hand or chime in at that point and we'll take a moment and we'll go through that information a little more clearly. But there is a fair bit of information to go through even just in the first part of this. So first, just broadly going through the agenda on what we're going to be discussing today. There's 4 major data points that we're going to be discussing during this part of the presentation. Those are going to be cannabis business permits in 2022. So it's kind of like an overview of who we permitted in 2022, the numbers relating to that, and a little bit of information about what the market looked like by the end of 2022. The second topic is going to be the timeline for getting permitted in 2022. So this is a breakdown of kind of how long it takes to process through the permitting pipeline on each different stage, not just with our office, but also with the planning department and with DBI, because those are two of our major city partners that our applicants need to work with if they're going to get permitted. The third topic is going to be the time and operation. So that's a pretty simple metric. It's just in the calendar year 2022, out of the number of permitted operators that existed, how long were they in operation for that year? And then the final data point that we're going to go through today is the budget distribution for 2022. So that is the OOC's staffing budget, how we are spending our money on our staff in order to make sure that we're working on permitting and enough resources are getting dedicated to that process. I do want to note, I'll probably note this throughout the presentation as well. This is all calendar year 2022, so it's not fiscal years or anything like that. This is January 1, 2022 to December 31, 2022. So we go to the next slide. And this is cannabis permits in the city and county of San Francisco. This is not one of the data points I just brought up. This is what Nikesh mentioned when he said, I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of the permitting pipeline and the permitting process. I know we have some operators on the committee. We have our city partners on the committee as well. I imagine the operators and the city partners are pretty familiar with the process, but I know we also have some members of the committee who are not going to be very familiar with the permitting process. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of, from the beginning to the end, how somebody goes about getting permitted in our wonderful city here. Slide. Yes, please.
You're good.
Okay. So an overview about the permits that are currently operating in the city and county of San Francisco. These are broadly split into three categories. Those are medicinal permits, temporary permits, and Article 16 permits. And so this slide and the following two slides, they're meant to provide kind of like a 50,000-foot overview of the market. So there is a lot more detail here, but this is just broadly speaking, these are the three categories. So medicinal permits, they were originally created after the passage of the Compassionate Use Act in 1996. And this is when state law legalized cannabis, but specifically for medicinal purposes. And the city subsequently created Article 33 of the Health Code, which is called the Medical Cannabis Act, in order to implement a local regulatory scheme that would oversee these medicinal dispensaries. Article 33 has been overseen by the Department of Public Health, who have also been great city partners since its creation. But the Office of Cannabis is working, as was mentioned earlier during our kind of check-in, that we're working to process these medicinal permits into full Article 16 permits. So it is important to note for anyone who's not aware, all of these medicinal operators, it is legal for them to sell adult use cannabis now. That did pass through the state law with the full passage of adult use cannabis. But we are still processing these applications in order to transition them fully under Article 16. And then they'll be off DBH's plate and mostly covered by the Office of Cannabis in terms of regulatory processes. The temporary permits, these were created after the approval of Prop 64, the Adult Use Marijuana Act, I'm sure we're all familiar with. These were traditional operators who were running cannabis businesses before the approval of Prop 64. And they were able to come forward, register with the city, and then they received a temporary permit, which authorizes them to engage in cannabis business. So these temporary permits are also in the process of being transitioned under Article 16 as well. And once they do, they will become, as we refer to them down here, permanent permits. They will no longer be a temporary status. I won't speak into too much of it. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But temporary really just refers to they have to renew their permit, I think every 60 days or 90 days or so. Yes. Go ahead.
Just broadly, like what percentage are each one of these three categories? Is it like a third, or 20, 40, 40, or?
So like broadly speaking, it's the medicinal permits and the Article 16 permits are pretty close in number to each other, although the Article 16 permits are climbing. And then the temporary permits outnumber both of them. That said, not each of them individually. We will have specific numbers later in the presentation to be able to see the totals. But generally speaking, that's kind of the breakdown. It's Article 16 permits and medicinal permits combined do outnumber the temporary permits right now, but they're temporary
Permits were mostly grows manufacturing. Article 33 sort of had all the dispensaries you knew before 2018. And then the temporary permits, because there was no framework in the city for a manufacturer or a cultivator to go get licensed. That was when the city decided, if you come out of the shadows, we will give you a temporary permit. So you can keep operating while you come into compliance.
precise.
And to Chair Jamalian's point, all of the businesses with temporary permits are supply side businesses.
Yeah, there's not a single temporary permit that is like a storefront retail for us. And then the Article 16 permit, so as of 2018, the city had implemented Article 16, and this is under the police code in order to govern adult use cannabis. This article is pretty broad and very deep as well, and it represents kind of the quote unquote permanent state of cannabis law in the city and county of San Francisco. So all cannabis businesses will eventually operate under Article 16, and all, non-medicinal, non-temporary permit applications are already processed under Article 16. All medicinal and temporary permits are being transitioned to Article 16, as we mentioned. So just some quick terminology as well, as we're throwing all this stuff around so people know what to associate with what. Medicinal permits, these are medical cannabis dispensaries. We often refer to them as MCDs. They're under Article 33 and they're being transitioned to Article 16 permits. Temporary permits, we often call them, refer to them as TMPs in shorthand or temps. And these are transitioning to permanent permits as well. Article 16 permits, we commonly refer to these as permanent permits. This is primarily made up of our verified equity applications that have been processed into full permits, but all MCDs and temp permits that have completed their permanent permit application will fall into Article 16 in the near future. Next slide. Another broad piece of information here for anyone who's not in the know. These are the different activities that permitted operations can participate in the city and county of San Francisco and how they're broken down. Nursery is, small growth plants. Cultivation is more for wholesale cultivation and sale of the plant. Manufacturing, that's anything from making edibles to rolling joints. Distribution is moving product from one store to another or doing wholesale distribution sales. Storefront retail, delivery only retail. This is the sale of cannabis directly to consumers, either over the counter or strictly by delivery process. Testing, right? Every product that sits on the shelves needs to be tested. Micro business is a very specific kind of permit, which essentially combines some of these activities into one permit. So if somebody doesn't want to have 3 different permits, they can combine it all into one, or they can have 3 different permits for different activities. And medicinal permits, which we no longer issue but do still exist, are the permits that the Article 33 operators currently operate under. It's also important to note here for anyone not aware and members of the public that there was a recent moratorium with Ordinance 200-144 that was put into place. That was put into place for all retail related cannabis business purposes. So we can no longer as an office process new applications for and issue permits for any retail related activity. So that would include, for example, if you wanted to run a micro business with a storefront retail and a manufacturing component, that would no longer be allowed. All of the other permit types are still able to be applied for and would still process and permit those applications. It's strictly the retail related activities that are no longer being processed. Another little caveat, anyone who submitted an application before the ordinance went into effect, those applications are being processed. I don't want any viewers or anything to worry. Their applications are being worked on. So next slide. That's the end of the overview. Now we're going to dive into the actual data. So the first data point we're going to talk about is the total number of permits that were granted in the 12-month period of the calendar year 2022. Slide, please. So permanent cannabis business permits new in 2022. In the calendar year 2022, the OOC processed and issued 14 permanent cannabis business permits. So you can see the spread out here, but we've got, for anyone listening by phone, we have 1 cultivation, 1 manufacturing permit, 1 distribution permit, and 1 micro business permit. And then we had 10 storefront retail permits. So again, these are permits. These permits were issued to 12 individual businesses. So you can tell that 1 or 2 of these businesses holds more than 1 permit. And again, these were for the calendar year 2022. So 01/01/2022 to 12/31/2022. And I think it's important to note that the data points that we're going to be talking about today, some of them specifically refer to permits, some of them specifically refer to businesses. So I'll try to be clear on what we're talking about here, but that's why some of the numbers that you'll see across some of the slides, they may not look like they add up exactly 1 to 1. It's usually a discrepancy between, are we talking about the actual permits that were issued, or are we talking about the number of businesses that those permits are issued to? Slide, please. So stepping back a little bit from that individual data point, this is an example of what the OOC's totals are looking like to date. So currently the OOC has issued 46 permanent permits since we started processing applications in 2019. And this graph will show you that the rate of permit issuance and processing has drastically increased over the last 4 years. So if you're going by the totals that we've listed here, right, in 2019, we processed 2 applications. In 2020, we processed 12, which brought us up to 14 permanent permits. 21, we processed 8, which brought us to 22 existing permanent permits. In 2022, we processed 14, which brought us to 36 permanent permits at the end of 2022. And so far this year, we've processed another 10 applications, which brings us to that 46 number of permanent permits.
Can we ask a question while you're?
Yes, please.
Okay, so of the 46 permanent permits issued, how many were from an equity applicant?
45.
Yeah, that's a great question. 45 of them have been equity applicants. I believe one of them is our first transitioned medical cannabis dispensary, which we transitioned 2 months ago. So prior to this, you know, you can see there's a massive rate increase, and where this is really coming from is that members of our office were able to work with the state to secure a grant so that our office could expand and bring in new staff members. Those new staff members are 100% of their time is dedicated to processing permit applications. And that's where this, you know, rapid growth in our speed and processing really came from. Prior to this, the staff was, the office was significantly smaller. And, you know, I don't think there was an individual who had 100% of their time dedicated just to permitting. So that's really where the drastic increase is coming from. Next slide, please. And then this should give you a snapshot of where the entire market was at the end of 2022. So just to make sure that we're totally clear, that last slide was permanent permits. So Article 16 permits. This slide is talking about the entire market as a whole. So the permanent permits, the medicinal permits, and the temporary permits. So we had at the end of 2022, 116 unique businesses, which held 145 permits between them. So 30 of these businesses were permanently permitted, all equity businesses at the end of 2022. As we mentioned, another 15 equity applicants have completed their applications since then. And then the 46th one was a MCD transition. At the end of 2022, 54 of these were temporary businesses, and 32 of these still held their medicinal licenses. To give you a little bit of a read through on what the breakdown is going to be a little further, out of these 116 businesses, 62 of these were retailers, and they held 67 permits. 54 of these were supply side businesses, so all those other permit types that we talked about that weren't retail related, they held 78 permits. And then the market, sorry, this was a snapshot, just to reiterate, of a market at the end of 2022. So there definitely have been some changes in the market since this time, whether that's closures or more openings. Yes, Jay?
Does medicinal there mean medicinal retail exclusively?
So medicinal, it would be, these are Article 33 permit operators.
Right.
So they do have the ability to sell adult use, but they still are technically medicinal retailers as far as the letter of the law is concerned. But medicinal retailers are able to sell adult use cannabis since the passage of process.
So what's
It's
the
all the
difference?
legacy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Prior to 2018. That's how you can summarize anything that says MCD or medicinal or retail. Those were all the legacy.
But they're all retail. They're always all retail.
Always.
For all intents and purposes, there is no difference, you know,
Yeah.
between a permanently permitted operator and a previously existing MCD in terms of if you walked into the store and what your customer experience would be like. It's really just the history of these businesses, how long have they been in operation, and by the letter of the law, what technical version of a permit are they currently? And so at the end of 2022, we had 32 businesses that were still operating under their medicinal licenses. I believe that number is now just 31 because of the one that has transitioned. Moving into the next slide.
And Scott, if you wouldn't mind, just
Oh,
really
yeah,
quickly,
I have to go back.
one thing to note about the medical dispensaries, that number will fluctuate because the medical dispensaries are subject to reauthorization from our office and reapproval from PPH, provided that they are complying with their equity commitments that they signed on to making at the beginning when they submitted their application. So just taking one step back, if you were a medical cannabis business operator and you wanted to get permanent conversion under Article 16, at that time when you submitted your application, you needed to submit an equity plan outlining the different equity commitments you would make. Our office has been reviewing those plans and reauthorizing these businesses' ability to sell adult use based on where they are with those commitments that they made. That is something that we focused a lot of energy on in this last year and a half in particular, to make sure that there is diligence with following up, with getting the metrics, and ensuring that there is a good faith effort to meet the commitments that were set out. There have been a handful of times where that hasn't happened, and that particular business has not been able to continue operating. That's why I said at the outset that that number fluctuates from year to year, or even at different points in the year, because a dispensary that might be in compliance after the first 4 months may not be after the second set, and then may be back in compliance during the next set. So if you have any questions or that's confusing, I'm happy to answer it. Just wanted to point out, if you see that number fluctuating a little bit, that's.
I have a question then. So could you just, quickly maybe, adult use? Well, define that, please.
Yeah, adult use, a lot of people would colloquially refer to that as just recreational use. So any use that is not specifically medicinal is adult use. So whether that's.
Adult use was basically what was voted on the 2016 ballot and was implemented in 2018. It's the recreational legalization. That's why we have the different types of businesses, because it needs to adhere to the state law that the voters voted for.
For example, you could say that we have adult use liquor laws in this state, in the sense that.
So you gotta be 21.
You have to be over a certain age. There are certain requirements, but it's just the full recreational legalization of it.
Pretty much, yeah. Got it. Okay, thanks. Got it, guys.
On to the next slide. So the next data point that we're going to be getting into is the processing time for applications. So this is the average time that a cannabis business permit was processing in the prior 12 months, or the 12 months of the calendar year 2022, measured from the date that the OOC receives the application until a permanent cannabis business permit is issued. It's important to note that this is a very multi-layered and multi-departmental process. There's not just the OOC that's involved. It's not even just the OOC and the planning department and the Department of Building Inspections. It's also DPH, depending on the type of license. It's also the San Francisco Police Department, the Fire Department. There's a whole bunch of people that are involved here. We're mostly going to be talking about the Office of Cannabis and then very broadly about planning and DPH. Next slide, please. So the first step of the permitting process is kind of the intake, or what we commonly in the office refer to as part 1 of the application process. So during this stage, applications are assessed on documents relating to the viability of their business. So this is things like business registration, making sure you have the correct filings with TTX, the Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office. Business formation documents, that would be like filings with the state, filings with local regulatory offices. And this would also be things like bylaws for your company or articles of incorporation. And the third major part of part 1 of the application process is what we refer to as proof to occupy. So this is essentially validation from a landowner that you have the authorization and the right to operate a cannabis business at a specific location. So a lease, a sublease, maybe you yourself own the property and you have it deeded. So analysts will then perform pretty rigorous checks of these documents to make sure that they meet all of the requirements that are put forward under Article 16. So examples of that might be, we have proportionate interest language, particularly with equity applicants, that needs to be abided by, and that language needs to be in these operating agreements. If there are potential sales that are going to be pursued, there's regulations that dictate when and how those sales can occur, what type of equity requirements an operation might have if they're going to sell their business afterwards as they move forward. And this is pretty much entirely conducted by the Office of Cannabis. There is a small initial check that's done with planning. That's just kind of a surface level. Is this area, zoned? Is this an appropriate place for this business to be going legally speaking? After this part 1 process is completed, sorry, next slide, thank you. It moves into being handled by other departments. So I'll just say at the outset that I'm definitely not an expert in planning department processes or Department of Building Inspection processes. We have two wonderful representatives from those departments on the committee here. I'm sure they can field some of your like questions if you'd like. But because this is mostly OOC focused, if we're going to get really into the weeds of these processes, I would probably say we should agendize a presentation from these departments so that they can go into more detail and prepare for those questions. But to give you a brief overview, planning really checks, the planning related aspects of the application. So this will be things like zoning, business activities relating to the zoning, potential CEQA considerations. There may also be a planning commission hearing that's necessary in order to make sure that the applications can move through and be authorized for the correct types of activities. The OC was able to secure a grant in the last year that pays for a full-time position in the planning department for an individual who can directly oversee all of the cannabis applications that get referred through the planning department. That individual's on our committees, and Matthew Chandler. Feel free to touch base with him after the meeting if you'd like. It's wonderful. And he's helped us a lot with this process here. And he does everything from processing application referrals, overseeing these applications as they move through the planning department, as they might touch other planners. He's kind of a touch point for all planning related questions. We meet with him on a weekly basis to make sure that us and planning are on the same wavelength in terms of potential zoning issues or issues that might come up with the zoning administrator. So that has definitely made the transition process out of the Office of Cannabis and into these departments a lot easier and a lot more expedited. And then after planning completes their review, the application moves into the Department of Building Inspection. The Department of Building Inspection will review plans. They will review, everything from architectural plans all the way through to like electrical, water, any type of supplementary systems that might need to be put into the business. They will issue what's called a building permit, or it's colloquially referred to as a job card that businesses will have to get sign off on from all of these departments before they're able to vote in. So that also subsequently has a bunch of project-specific inspections and sign-offs that occur relating to that job. Next slide, please. Final part of the application process is after an applicant is issued a building permit, and they reach back out to our office, that's when they begin part two. Part two requests, I would say, significantly more information from the applicant just in terms of volume. The OOC will be working with the applicant to review everything from general business operations, security plans. Every business is required to have a good neighbor policy that the office will also review. They'll need to provide proof that they've acquired a state license. If a business is large enough, they'll need to enter into a labor peace agreement or other type of a sanctioned union contract. And there will also be permit activity specific information. So if you're going to cultivate, if you're going to manufacture, if you're going to distribute, there will be subsequent questions and information that the OOC is going to request from you. And then part two concludes when not only have all of the forms for the OOC been completed and all the requested information has been completed, but also when all of the Department of Building inspections have been completed and signed off on. The second to last inspection that occurs is almost always an inspection from SFPD. Not that they don't do the inspection, just sometimes it's not the second to last, but it's usually the second to last. And that's like a security check to make sure that the business has all the appropriate security measures in place before they open. And then the final inspection is done by the Office of Cannabis to make sure that all the boxes have been checked, all the appropriate regulations have been followed. For example, you'll need to have a fireproof safe, right? Make sure that that's all checked off. And once that final inspection has been completed, then the business will be issued a permanent cannabis business permit. So in this next slide that we're going to move into, we're going to look at the actual
Quick
timeline
question.
of each of these steps. So go ahead. Shane.
Sorry, just a quick question. Is this last phase, is that where you look at a labor peace agreement?
Yes, this would be labor peace agreements. This would be security contracts.
Okay.
General business plans. There's a whole slew of forms that somebody has to fill out. For the entirety of the first part is on one form, and it really just asks about your business information. Part two is a number of forms that go into a lot more detail about the specifics of your operation.
And Scott, before you move on, just really quickly on the point about labor peace negotiations for the LP, the labor peace agreement, because this came up last time. What we also do is we work with OEWD to confirm that the labor union that's being provided to us as entering into the long-term labor peace agreement is actually qualified. And so we are not experts on that. This is why we reach out to OEWD. They provide their input. It's actually the reason why we were on to Protect at a much earlier point in time before any of these articles started coming out, as early as 2019.
Yeah. And if you're under a certain number of employees, you just have to get a statement that you will enter an LPA once you cross that threshold. So I think San Francisco is very straightforward in that sense. Other local jurisdictions are not at all.
And that number is 10, or it's 10
Now
now.
it used to be 20, right?
Yes, it used to be 12, that number has come down. Moving into the next slide. Oh, sorry, before we move into the timelines, I did want to note specifically that these two processes, as I talked about, they do kind of have an in tandem. So when we're looking at the numbers here, there is a lot of crossover between these final two steps, because the part two for the Office of Cannabis starts with the issuance of a building permit. So at that point, the DBI process is not complete, and the part two of the OOC process is just starting, and then they move in tandem forward from there. Just wanted to make sure that we noted that. Next slide, please. So these are the actual times, and what I've done here is I've provided both the shortest processing time and the longest processing time, as well as the average time. And I'm going to get into a lot of information here, but I'll be happy to take questions once I've gone through this. It's important to note right at the top here that, again, these are the applications that were processed in 2022. So if you remember all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, we're talking about those 14 new permits that were processed and issued in 2022.
Is that timeline built on top of each other? Or are those just the individual times it takes per block?
So
255 days for block one, another 317, or was that just and essentially another 70 days or 60 something days between them?
So no, these were actually subsequent, because this will end at the issuance of a job. So this number here will represent the amount of time until the job card was given to the applicant, not until the job card was completed. And then this number will represent the amount of time after the job card was issued that it took for the application to be completed.
And Scott, if you don't mind, just to answer your question even more precisely, they're individual permits.
So it makes sense now that.
Yeah. So, the first important note to make is that this timeline starts the moment that an office receives the application, because we get a timestamp on that. So especially if you're looking at this first part of the office intake, a big part of why this number is so large is the fact that many applications were received in previous years. And then as the OOC was able to staff up and process applications more quickly, we were picking up applications not only in following the processing tiers as outlined by Article 16, which very, very briefly, I'm happy to go into this more, but the processing tiers are essentially a legislated order in which we need to process applications, first of which is equity applications. So these applications were picked up in the order in which they were received, and many of these applications were received in previous years. So if it took 12 months, let's say, to move through the first part, that application was almost certainly received the previous year. And so a huge portion of that time was just the application was far down on the list. What hadn't been picked up because it was not in the correct order, right? It needs to be processed in the legislatively mandated order.
And Scott, if you don't mind, just because this is a really important point, what Scott is effectively saying is that the average time in that first step is a little bit misleading here for a variety of reasons. One is because it reflects a point in time when the office was not able to pick up an application at the time that it was submitted. In fact, it was often the case that it could be 5-6 months, right? So that builds that number in. What's different about now, and Scott will go into this even more, is that when an application is submitted, we can almost instantaneously assign it to an analyst. So that time between it being submitted and being assigned to an analyst is significantly truncated now. So if you're looking at these numbers and saying, wow, it still takes a really long time, it does take a long time to get permitted, but there's reason to be really optimistic that at certain points in the process, these numbers will come down.
Well, I think they already have come down, but I think the average time right up there is about 38 months. And I think we're still somewhere between best case scenario, 18, And worst case scenario, 36 months. That's still pretty realistic.
Well, and Scott will speak to this, but we actually had one application that we were able to permit within the calendar year.
Yeah.
From the date.
Right,
it was
but I think that's the best case,
Yeah.
you know, then.
So it can happen, but you're right. I think 18 to 24 is probably better average.
Yeah, so I will speak into a little more detail about the shortest and the longest processing time to give you some context about where these numbers come from and why these averages might look a little higher, and they are particularly higher than the current processing time is, because remember, these are the 2022 numbers. So Office of Cannabis intake, as we just discussed, that's a two-part process where we do our initial intake and our initial review. Also a light review from planning before it gets fully referred to planning. Once that application gets through the initial review, it gets assigned the tag processing. And just to give you a little bit more context too, in 2022, the average time for when something started processing to when it was referred to planning was 2.3 months. So a little over 60 days. So that should give you the idea that once the application was picked up and started to be worked on, it only took about 2 months to process that first part of the application on average before it got sent to me. Planning referral, then to DBI intake. This kind of the start date is from when we refer it to the planning department. These dates should be pretty accurate because a timestamp gets created in our system when that referral goes through. However, in between these two steps and honestly all the way towards the issuance of a job card, the data can get a little muddled. There's multiple different systems that all of these departments use to track, for example, the process that job cards are on the way to completion. That's a totally different system in terms of tracking that. So making sure that all these systems get updated across the multiple departments, it does lead to some discrepancies in the dates. But generally speaking, these timelines should be accurate for these, or pretty close to accurate for these two departments. And again, you can see here that the shortest processing time, we're looking at about a month to move through planning. The longest processing time on these applications was closer to 2 years. And then the shortest time in DBI was around 4 months. And then the longest time was closer to 21 months to move through. After the issuance of a job card, however, when we move back into part 2 and back with the Office of Cannabis, as you'll see at this final step down here at the bottom, this refers to those multiple forms that Shay was asking about. And it also refers to all the subsequent inspections that need to be signed off on. So this happens as the applicant completes their construction, and then they in tandem work with us in their part 2 forms. And I would say part 2 delays are most commonly caused by delays with build out. So this is, delays with construction. I'm sure our operators here know how that feels when you're working with contractors, or just contracting delays, or delays related to getting funding to complete that build out, which a lot of operators have run into. Sometimes it's due to delays relating to the submission of materials from applicants. And so I want to add a little context for the shortest time and longest time now to give you an idea of where these numbers come from. So the shortest time, this was an application that we received in calendar year 2022. And at this point, we had already also started our new staff members, so our processing speed was picking up a lot more. So you can see that we were able to process this application like a little over a month and a half in part 1 for the OOC. So that should give you a much better read on when an applicant is responsive. And now that we have the new staff members, how quickly we are working on applications and how quickly they're working through the system. Meanwhile, this longest time one, this was one that had been submitted in the calendar year 2021, kind of more towards the beginning of 2021. That's part of the reason that it took 12 months to get through, because it took a while just to get it assigned to an analyst. But there's a lot more context that can be brought in this part 2, especially for the shortest time and longest time. Shortest time is similar situation, right? It moved through the other processes, it got back to us. We were able to process it in about a month and a half. So again, this is an extremely responsive applicant. People who are really on top of their materials. They had no build out delays. They had no funding issues. So they were able to move through the permitting process very quickly.
What kind of permit was that?
This was a storefront retail permit. So, yes,
Are both the longest time and the shortest time storefront retail?
they're both storefront retail. And it's the same, sorry, I should just, that should be obvious, but it's the same application that we're talking about for shortest time and longest time for each of these stages.
Okay, cool.
So to give you some context for the longest processing time application, especially for part 2, I actually went through and I looked step by step through every single portion of part 2 to get an analysis of why this application took as long as it did. So we had about 15 months of these 21 months were times where feedback had been provided, as in the forms had been sent to the applicant saying you need to update these forms. And so they were kind of waiting on information. Maybe they need to get a delivery vehicle or something like that, right? So they're waiting on that purchase, they're waiting on insurance plans. So we, as an office, are waiting on them to submit information to us so that we can continue processing their application. About 2 months of this time was due to delays relating to city and state department processes. I don't want to say delays like it was an issue, but just there are other partners that we work with on this, including partners of the state. And sometimes it does cause, timelines to be extended.
So permit issued also means you have your state. Or
Permit issuance means
you're fully ready to go.
fully ready to go. So this could be, for example, like a month, it took extra month to get the state license or something like that. So that means when you do the math, right, this was kind of in the OOC's hands and actively working on it for about 4 months. And the remainder of that time, I didn't call them directly and ask, but it could have been everything from build out delays to funding delays to just any sorts of other issues, just formal billing delays.
And Scott, can I just add, like, it's not uncommon that when an application starts and when it ends, the ownership team looks a little different. The name of the business may have changed, right? And so every time that happens, it adds on asking the same questions, producing the documents and updating them. So it could be that the applicant is very responsive, but because the nature of their business is changing, it just extends the process. It's not just because the applicant is non-responsive.
Yeah.
It could just be because it's a complex project, funding streams go away, they have to find new investors, new owners, there's disagreements about how something's going to be resolved. We see it often in that first part with the Office of Cannabis Intake. With the operating agreement in particular, there can be a lot of time spent on 1 or 2 provisions of that document. And it can take 3 to 4 months because one side doesn't want to concede, the other is saying, look, this is the law. So there are a lot of variables. No application is going to ever be the same as the next. Where we are encouraged is Scott said staffing helps, streamlining with planning and including conversations with DBI is going to help. More than anything, grant dollars really help because they create another funding stream. That's something we're keeping an eye on. We're a little bit wary of what that funding stream looks like over the next couple of years. This coming year's GoBiz grant is already little over a third of what GoBiz 3 was, right? So it's significantly reduced. And we kind of see that in cycles. GoBiz 2 was much smaller than GoBiz 1. So it's not reason to be alarmed, but it is something we're tracking. And we anticipate that it could impact an applicant's ability to move through if they don't have the funding that's available. We heard often this year that the large award amount made it possible for businesses to rebound from being targeted or being able to pay their vendors and continue to move on. So those dollars also help a lot and they go a long way.
Yeah. If you mind, if we go to the next slide here, this does sort of summarize a lot of what we were just talking about. For full transparency, I am one of those staff members that was able to be brought in on grant dollars and able to spend maybe 99% of my time on permitting since I am here right now. But so that gives you an idea of the historical issues that we've run into is really the lack of resources, the lack of funding. Since we've been able to increase our staff count, a lot of these processing times have come down. We had fewer dollars for technical assistance in the past, so that has certainly helped our applicants move forward as we've been able to provide more funding to our technical assistance providers. And especially in the first part, one of the biggest delays has to do with the fact that the clock starts with the submission date of the application, not when the application actually gets picked up for processing. And as Nikesh went into, nowadays, there is basically no delay between the submission date and an assignment date, whereas previously, sometimes that delay was upwards of 6 months. Especially the second part, most of these delays, like we said, come from a lack of shared systems across departments. Some of this has to do with just complexity during the build out or issues with funding. And a little bit of it has to do with response time or requested documents, whether that's, delays that the applicant is experiencing or delays that might be caused by them interacting with other state offices or other city offices, and just trying to get things that they need. Yeah, this is really just a summary slide to make it a little bit simpler.
I have a question about, as we've had these established processes for a few years now, I know I'm on the supply side and a lot of businesses have not made it, or they've thrown in the towel when it comes to getting their occupancy to F1 or whatever they need to do. Is there a way for this could be attractive for other businesses like myself? We get offered other cultivation sites all the time. that people have thrown in the towel where you can kind of come in and step in. Let's say they're under a temporary permit or, you know, they've already been through planning and all of their build out is done. Let's say we want to step in and then get a license for this space. Is there an area where you can kind of, you know, fast track through this stuff in a building that's already built out, everything's permitted, you don't have to do any more construction to come in and operate?
Right, I can answer that one.
Yeah.
What I've learned is, so yes, there can be a pathway for that, but it's highly specific to the particular project, the ongoing conversations with fire or any of the other cities that are involved in the ongoing compliance efforts relating to that project. So in short, yes, highly variable, and I think the best thing to do is probably just to reach out to the Office of Cannabis with a particular location and
Yeah.
ask those questions up front. I don't want to say that, yes, it's universally possible because I don't think it is, but.
So I just
couldn't
know
there
on the
be-
cultivation side, there's a lot of empty buildings.
Well, we were discussing that last year. We kind of forecasted that there would be a, because fire was not really cooperative when it came to the notice of violation. And we still didn't really get any cooperation from fire. That's also, they're not here, which speaks volumes. But fire did not want to change our use code, and the CO2 requirements and coming into compliance just made it too expensive. And that's why they're available.
Yeah.
And to Nagesh's point, it is a case by case basis, but I think one thing that we should look at here is to see what of the unnecessary red tape can we eliminate or try to eliminate with recommendations and amendments to Article 60. And that's sort of what we were to do, make it more approachable, make it easier, lower the barrier of entry. And I think there are some, you know, we now have 3, 4, 5 years of permitting experience, especially in planning and EDI, and I think we all agree that certain steps can be eliminated, but they really don't do anything. But that needs to be codified. And so let's look at that. I think that's really, if we focus on that, it might actually make an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And Adam, I think to Ali's point, if a building has been left, right, so the occupant said, "I can't operate here anymore, can't come to compliance with fire," then those same corrective actions that haven't been taken, they still carry with the building.
Sure,
So even
but
if
it
someone
could
is
be,
stepped
it's a
in.
lot cheaper for an operator to just take those problems over than start.
Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's.
That's why they left. But
Yeah.
in other cases, the upside of that is if you do have a certificate of occupancy and it's all been inspected, that also carries through. So, you know, that's the upside of.
Yeah.
So it's highly variable, but
Yeah.
that's one sort of warning sign. It was left for a reason, and those outstanding issues they will likely carry.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because we are talking about the, you know, the nexus point between Article 16, Article 33, planning code, DBI regulations, you know, and all the subsequent regulations that come under that, like fire, like you're talking
Well,
about.
the disappointment of the planning code amendment that only took into consideration retail was this was the one time we were amending the code and none of the recommendations of this committee were actually considered. So I think we just have to push harder as a committee to get these recommendations.
So some great points being brought up. Definitely something we can examine too, if we want to go into more detail in the future, is what our like current processing speed is. That's numbers that I can get for you. Because if we want to look at cutting what we would consider regulatory red tape or something like that, that's something we can definitely discuss.
So this is part one, right?
Yeah, but if
We
we
got
look
part
at,
two.
right, yeah, if we look at, yeah, we'll see. And then there might be a part 3 down the line with more updated information about our current speeds that we could definitely, with this, that context would be very important.
There will not be part 10.
Speaking of moving the presentation along, going to the next slide, this is a pretty straightforward data point. What we'll be talking about here is the total number and the length of time in operation that permitted cannabis businesses which operated for more than 30 days in their categories of activities under Article 16 in the calendar year 2022. So that's a big mouthful, but it's basically just how long did cannabis business operate in 2022? So if they were permitted, how long were they in operation during that calendar year? The next slide, please. So this is a snapshot by the end of the calendar year 2022, and these are the Article 16 permits. So by the end of the calendar year 2022, we had 30 Article 16 permits. And in terms of how long they were on operation, they were broken up into these timelines here. For anyone audibly listening, I'll just read them aloud quickly. we had one that ran for 1 month, two for 2 months, two for 3 months, one for 4 months, zero for exactly 5 or 6 months, two for 7 months, one for 8 months, zero for 9 months, two for 10 months, one for 11 months, and 18 for all 12 months. So the next slide, please, will bring a lot of context into this. These are Article 16 permits. So these are the most recent permits that we are processing and then, issuing to people. These are the full permanent permits. And so the variance in the timeline and operation for these permits entirely comes from when the permit was issued. So the way that you would read this graph is if a business was permitted in January, in late January, let's say, they operated for 11 months in 2022. If a business was operated in late November of 2022, they operated for 1 month in 2022, right? It's a very weird data point, but
Is it safe to assume that everybody operating for 12 months was fully permanent by December of 2021?
yes, so if you look at our stats from previous years, we had 18 operators going into 2022, and so that's why they ran for the full 12 months. Also, I ran all this data, a little leeway is provided for exact dates and things. If you got your permit on January 14th, right, that we counted that whole.
We got the 12.
So there's a little bit of variance here, but all of the variance in the permanent permits is due to just when the permit was issued, because we didn't have a single one of these close.
Thanks, Scott. That's the point I want to make sure it gets imparted here. These businesses did not close. That's not what these numbers are reflecting, with the exception of one. All of these businesses reflect the time that they were in operation from when they issued their permit, if it happened in 2022. And then the 18 are those that were permitted at the end of the previous year.
And we can move to the next slide. These are going to read in the same way, but again, the variance will be explained for different reasons. So these are the temporary permits that were in operation by the end of 2022. We had 68 temporary cannabis business permits at the end of 2022. And just again, for our audio listeners, we had 4 that ran for 8 months, 0 that ran for exactly 9 months, 1 that ran for 10 months, 9 that ran for 11 months, and 54 that ran for all 12 months. So if we move to the next slide, that will show a little bit of the explanation of the variance here.
And Scott, just as a point of clarification, I think you said 68 refers to the number of permits. Is it permits or businesses?
Sorry, these are, excuse me, my apologies. These are businesses. Getting a little muddled in my own variance here. These are businesses. So some of these businesses will have multiple permits. We had 68 temporary cannabis businesses in the calendar year 2022. And by the end of it, we had 54 that had run for all 12 months. So different from the Article 16 permits here, the variance on these numbers is almost entirely due to temporary business closures or temporary businesses whose permits lapsed for some period of time. Maybe they had some regulatory code that they needed to meet. I know the F1 designation has been mentioned a couple of times. There were certainly a lot of businesses that needed to meet the F1 designation. Some of them had to go offline and then were able to meet those requirements later and open back up. But if they went offline at 8 months and they didn't open back up until the next calendar year, they would have fallen into that 8-month category. But unlike the Article 16 businesses, these variances are mostly due to business closures. So we can move to the next slide. And again, this is MCDs. This one will read very much in the same way as the previous slide on temps. For our audio listeners, we had 2 businesses that ran for 9 months, 1 that ran for 10 months, 1 that ran for 11 months, and 32 that ran for 12 months. So moving to the next slide, another way to read this is that we had 32 medical cannabis dispensaries that made it through all 12 months in operation. We had 4 medical cannabis dispensaries that either closed or suspended or surrendered their license for whatever reason that might be. But it's not always due to closure, but it is more often due to closure when we're talking about these licenses. We can move to the next slide. Get out of these. So the final data point that we're going to be talking about today, and then I promise we will wrap, is the budget distribution for the OOC. This is basically about resource allocation regarding permitting in the calendar year 2022. Next slide, please. So if we're looking at the OOC's 2022 staffing budget, and we're looking at the portion that relates directly to permitting, we're talking about 54% of our staffing budget. So what does this cover? This covers various members of the staff who contribute to the permitting process, work that's done by the OOC. All the staff members that were accounted for this touch the permitting process in some way. That said, the amount of time that they spend on the permitting process does vary anywhere from 25% to, like I said, the permit analyst myself spend essentially 100% of our time looking at permits. And so some of this, this is a big calculation where these numbers come from, but this is essentially based on the amount of time that staff members who work on permitting touch the permitting process relative to the amount of staffing budget that the OOC has to do.
Does that include renewals?
This does include renewals, yes. It includes essentially every part of the permitting process.
And so if you wouldn't mind, can I add one more piece of context here? So this 54%, like Scott was saying, includes everyone in the office of cannabis because it's the overall OOC staffing budget. It includes me. The amount of time I'm spending on permitting is not the same as the amount of time Scott is spending on permitting. So I bring this percentage down. But this is not to be read as the dedicated analysts aren't spending 100% of their time
Yeah.
or close to
No,
it.
it's just averaging it out over the whole staff.
That's
Exactly.
Got it.
And then the other thing to keep in mind is that because it's for 2022, this also reflects almost 6 months where we didn't have the 3 dedicated permanents because they didn't join until June of 2022. So this number makes a lot of sense and it's similar to the one we previously reported, but I just think it's important to add on that. we
The
have
whole
more-
pie got bigger, that's.
That's right. We have more members in the office and for a period of time, the folks that would have brought this up even more, they weren't with the office.
Yeah, for full context, I think since the last time we did this presentation, which is almost 2.5 years ago now, the office staff has more than doubled. So we have grown pretty significantly in the last 3 years.
And I think us operators can definitely attest to certain things are moving a lot faster than you guys know.
Particularly renewals. We go to the next slide, there will be a little bit more context about what this talks about. It doesn't include renewals on this list, but renewals are a portion of this. This is really the part 1 and the part 2 processes that we discussed earlier that encompass this percentage. And the total cost of this was around $775,000. It's hard to get the very exact number, but this is a pretty close touchstone in terms of the budget, the staffing budget that gets spent on the permitting process. So like I said, this includes everything from part 1, everything from part 2, renewal inspections. Also includes things like events, any of the temporary events that we permitted, they would fall into this as well. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about what the other percentage covers as well, and you have to see that it's offset. So moving to the next slide. So then this is the 2022 staffing budget that was spent on other core services. And that makes up about 46% of our budget. So just to give you an idea of what this stuff covers, they're listed here, but I'll give you a little snippet about each of these. This would be things like equity verification. So this is ensuring that applicants who are trying to become verified equity applicants meet the city's equity requirements before they are officially confirmed as BEAs, and then they're able to move through the application process. This also is enforcement and compliance. So Nikesh listed off some of those numbers earlier. That includes investigating unpermitted operations, citizen complaints, but this would, also include non-renewal based inspections that might happen for regulatory reasons. If we get a complaint about an operated business for a permitted business, for example, or if there was some issue with the renewal, we need to go back. This also includes community outreach. So anything from going to community events to just connecting with community stakeholders, even just via email. Our general inbox is usually pretty busy. This also includes rulemaking because we're always trying to adapt. There's always new things coming up. Great example is like the temporary event regulation that we're going to be working on in the next couple of months here. We're always working on new, regulations and new information based on how the market is changing. This also includes collaboration with city partners, working with those departments to make sure that we're as efficient as possible. Grant applications and distributions. Grant dollars are the only reason I'm really standing here right now. So this is a big process for us to work with the state and work with the federal government sometimes to secure grants that might help fund our office. And then obviously collaboration with the oversight committee.
I have a question regarding the grants. Is it just the state and the GOBIS grants that you guys are getting funded from, or are there other grants that you are constantly applying for? I'm sure there are pilot project grants or what you guys do as city administrators, right, or as an administrative officer?
So it's both yes and no. We aggressively apply for grants. The grants that are available for the work we do are more limited than we need. So
I would think they're very limited.
it's unfortunate. There is not a grant for a pilot program of this sort, right? But we do go after the GoBiz dollars. We go after the BSCC dollars. And a lot of that is in an effort to ensure that all the dollars that are available to give to equity operators and applicants and TA providers, that we've secured those. But then, as you can see, there's so much work that we also go after the dollars that help supplement our city budget to be able to staff more people in the office. The truth is, if we were just staffed by what the city budget is, we would be at half of what we are right now.
And it almost, I know from like the state grant structure, it almost works against you to have a high permitting rate, right? Because LA is taking down a lot of grant money because of the amount of temp permits they have, right?
Yeah.
So how do we, what's the strategy to take down max grant dollars?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two different questions there, right? One is, are we receiving max grant dollars based on what we're eligible? And to answer that is yes. If the state requirements about how they are divvying up these dollars would change, then it's possible that we could stand to get more of those dollars. And that's, I think, the question you're really asking is, how do those change? Well, it's a good thing that you sit on the state board as well.
He's a chair.
Because that's a conversation that's come up a couple times, and I've made pretty clear that San Francisco is at a little bit of a disadvantage to begin with because it's smaller, right? And because we're smaller, it means the number of permits we stand to issue is also going to be smaller compared to LA. The other factor in all this is that we don't issue provisional permits
Exactly.
in the same way other jurisdictions do, and that's because we don't want to have a business go through the effort of getting a provisional and then they can never open.
Well, we also don't want that carousel of provisional
That's right.
licenses that
That's
the
right.
LA illicit market is playing on.
That's right. And so I think, our process takes longer, but we also make sure, we also have businesses that can operate and are in operation
Right.
as soon as they're permitted, right? So I think it is a conversation with the state about how those dollars are going and what metrics are used.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just, that's, all of that is great context for all of that fit into grant application and distribution bullet point here. So there's lots of work related to that. Anybody who's gotten grants before knows you have to submit receipts, you have to check all those, you have to check the state, sorry.
And equity verification, how many more applications are you getting? Is there- I
It's
know-
still steady.
It's steady. Even as I last checked, there were 4 in the hopper and we're current.
And how many verified equity applicants do we
There
have?
were about 300.
Yeah.
Right. Now, here's the thing. Our verified equity folks, and I'll take that back, actually. It's closer to 450 that have been verified. Of those, about 150, give or take, have actually submitted applications. So there is a overwhelming majority of folks who were verified who never took the next step of submitting an application. We reached out to all 300 of those folks prior to the moratorium going into effect, just so they were aware of how this might impact their ability to submit an application for retail, but it wouldn't necessarily close the door if they were interested on the supply side
Sure.
or another activity type.
Would it make sense to put a expiration on the actual verification? So that you have to use this number within 2 years, and I'm obviously can't really ask you directly.
Yeah.
So it's more of a question for my fellow members, because I'm a verified applicant, Dracarys as well, but even if I didn't do anything with it for 2 years, I would probably renew it or take that bandwidth from somebody else that might actually use it. And if you can get re-verified, great. But I think just given the market that we're in, given that we have a moratorium on retail, which is obviously the bulk of your new applications, I feel like we're taking away bandwidth for kind of a pointless exercise at this point. And I might be really wrong, it's just my view. And Bakari, I'd love your view on it because you're affected by it.
Also agree.
Right? There you go. More of it.
Yeah, no, I think he has a point there. I just kind of would like to know exactly how much is going to equity verification, and is that actually being like taken away from other people who are planning to use their equity verification, right? What's the average timeline it takes for somebody who is verified as equity to then start using it, right? Maybe we can base it off of that.
For the permitting timeline, we know it takes 3 years, let's say in the worst case, sure, it should be valid for those 3 years, right? You have 3 years to get a job card or 4 years. I just, it does just verifying police records, eviction records, census check, it's a lot. I remember going through it, it was a lot.
I would love, I mean, we should probably table the discussion for another time. We can also get data on it, but there are some other minor benefits that come along with being verified beyond just the priority processing of your application. I know there are some businesses that look specifically for equity applicants to try to hire. There's a couple other minor things that do tie into it, so those are other considerations.
Well, and you're right, we can't weigh in on the sort of question that you're asking, but I think what I've learned in doing this for the last couple of years is when you think you're solving one problem, it can ultimately create another problem. And so,
No disagreement here.
like for instance, if you put an expiration date on someone's verification and they want to be re-verified, then we have to actually re-verify that person, meaning that all the documents, some of those documents they can apply and carry over for the first time, but anything that relates to income and the asset threshold, they would have to replenish those documents. So you could make the argument that it might reduce the number of applicants that were individuals who should be verified, but it might increase
The
the work on the
re-verification.
re-verification process. What I've also seen is the bulk of these folks who were verified as equity individuals came very early in the process, right? The applicants we're receiving now, it's a much smaller amount, 4 or 5, and because we have someone who works very hard at processing those applications, it doesn't take nearly as long as it used to. So if you're trying to get a sense from us, how much of our time goes to verifying those, and I think that was a question you asked, it's a really good one. You know, maybe 5%, if even that, because that process has gotten very streamlined and we're very good at being responsive. If it takes a while, it's because we're just waiting for documents to be returned, but it doesn't take up, it's just,
That puts it in perspective.
It's not 30% of this, that's for sure. It's the bulk of it is a lot of it.
Now, we're also really lucky to have Princess Bustos, who is the person who oversees that process, and she was instrumental in sort of helping think about it when we first started and she was involved. So I think that also helps in terms of improving
And I mean, your offer used to be 50 to 60 applications.
That's right.
at any
It's
given
much more
point,
than-
right?
and we're still not-
In Apple right now.
It's generally no more than like a handful at a time that we're actively processing, and they're more recent submissions.
Not like what Eugene had.
That's right.
No, that's puts it in perspective. Thank you.
And just real quick, I had a comment. I know we were talking about the grant distributions. I think that it is something that we should note that, or I would like to know the numbers of maybe like how many equity-owned businesses are 40% versus 50%, because I know the state and the city have different definitions for equity, and that also determines if they can qualify for state grants, right? And so I know, like, for someone like myself, where the business structure is less than, for the equity applicant is less than 50% ownership, then I don't qualify for certain state grants, right? Well, it would be good to know, well, how much of a disadvantage are San Francisco equity applicants compared to the rest of the state with that discrepancy, right?
The short answer is most of the business applications that we have in our system, the equity applicant / owner owns 40%.
So then I guess the question, and for you, I guess, how would we then open that up more for San Francisco?
Well, you and I cannot be part of that conversation. That's sort of the problem.
That will be something that.
But I,
Oh, go ahead.
And just to provide a little bit of clarity to this, that's a state requirement. We don't presently have that requirement that if you own 40% or less, or if you own 40%, then 40% under 51%, then you're not eligible for grant dollars. That's a conversation that this committee, and Ali is right, you'll have to recuse yourself from that conversation, but the committee makes recommendations. Right now, those who own 40% are still a part, they can still be a part of those recommendations. If the state changes their funding criteria when they're issuing these grant dollars, And they're issuing grants to jurisdictions based on the percentage of applications they have from equity owners who own 50% or more, then we're going to receive less dollars. So it kind of goes back to the conversation we were having about, well, how do we influence the criteria so San Francisco maybe gets more of those dollars? That would cut in the opposite direction. San Francisco would receive less dollars because the majority of our applicants or applications are under 40.
And that, Ricari, I do think we have a very good, board here, committee here that will take that into consideration, and there'll be some changes in the disbursement of grant, but we're completely dependent on what the state sets as the threshold. So awesome, a good time to go back to your business partners and delegate.
And there will be a grants discussion agendized in the near future on this committee, because we will have another cycle of grants to talk about. Tying back into this presentation, we're very close to being done. If you want to go to the next slide for me. This is just to show you what that 46% number is. It's around $670,000. So we are at.
I apologize, you might have mentioned it. How many total employees are with the Office of Cannabis at the moment, which is
And
three?
right now,
We have 10 right now.
Okay.
In 2020, what'd you say?
You have no idea.
we did.
At the end of 2022, I would need to look back. But I think we were at
8 or
we
9.
were at-
Okay.
Yes, and then we can just go to the next slide, which is fun.
Thank you for that announcement first. You really important today.
Glad, yeah. Part 2 will be coming. And Nikesh, you might just go to the next slide too for our viewers, in case they want to contact us. Our contact information is up there. If any committee members have any final questions or anything related to this data, I'm happy to field them now. Otherwise, we can close out this already very long presentation. And folks can prepare themselves for part 2. Great. Okay,
I do think we need to take
we
public
do,
comment.
yes. We can do that.
Usually my part to forget.
Okay. We are, okay. For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of this table if you'd like to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code, 2494-753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments aloud as they come in. I see that the same commenter has their hand raised. Caller EB, if you can unmute, feel free to make your public comment.
Hello? Are we there?
Seems like we are still running into the same issue. I requested this commenter to maybe submit their comment to us by email, so I'm just going to check that very briefly. Do not see any comments submitted by email. Caller, my apologies. It seems like you're still having technical issues. Please feel free to submit your comment to us by email at officeofcannabis@sfgov.org, and I would be happy to read it into the record. Other than that, I do not see any other comments, Chair.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 7. We'll take a quick 10-minute break and then we will reconvene and get to the rest of the agenda. All right, we're back. We're going to move around the agenda a little bit because Mohammed from Public Health has to leave. So I'd like to go to agenda item number 10 and move that up as agenda item number 8. review and previous committee's recommendation on medicinal cannabis card program. So the Cannabis Oversight Committee in December of 2022 made the following compassionate care recommendation. Recommendations for supervisors include extend the hours of operation for BPH in-person MMIC program, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Addition of online and postal verification and processing of applications for MMIC, reimbursement of card fee by BPH Office of Vital Records. I think it's very important to note here that this is in vital record hands. And reimbursement by medical recommendation fees for low-income patients. Recommendations for DPH include outreach from DPH on how dispensaries can honor their obligation for cardholders, which might be a cross-section between the OOC and DPH, and access to resources through other city departments such as public library. If there aren't any comments to this motion, I'd like to open it up for public comment and then take a vote on passing these recommendations on to the Mayor's Office, Board of Supervisors, and DPH.
Dorothy? For members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of the table to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have two options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 24947530648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is now open and I will read your comments as they come in. We do have one individual here in person who would like to make a public comment. Please feel free to the podium.
Graham Goodwin. I want to represent the Browning Mary Democratic Club in that we've been working on this issue for a significant amount of time. And I think it's a real chicken and egg thing with the San Francisco Department of Public Health, in that their feedback to us has been that the hours are limited, everything is limited because there aren't that many people who request service. The truth of the matter is you make it very difficult, people aren't going to come. It's as simple as that, or they don't know about it, which is a key thing. So I don't know if I'll read all the recommendations, but I think among the other ones was a general outreach by public health to the citizens of San Francisco to indicate to them what cannabis medical services are available, what they would gain by having the MMIC card, such as not having to pay state sales tax. So one of the things I'd love to see is, again, with all due respect to public health, they basically have stonewalled us in any kind of interaction with them over this issue. So among other things, I'd love to see the committee open up some kind of dialogue where we get to meet with them, where it's not a black box situation where we just get turned down. We need a real dialogue where representatives from our community, our medical community, meet with them. And I'm just disturbed by it. We want to trust public health, yet they're not acting in our view in a real responsible way where we can trust them. So I appreciate the recommendations. I'd like to see follow-up with the board of supervisors too, so that they are really aware of this and hopefully they'll take some action and make the system work. Medical patients deserve attention. Cannabis medical patients deserve it. They're the basis, everything, that budget that we saw out there, that doesn't exist without medical patients, and this goes back to the early 90s and the 80s. And I want to see more emphasis for them. And they are, by the way, the bedrock of our consumers. The great majority come from that world, even if they don't identify directly with MMIC. Thank you for allowing me to give my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We do not currently have any online comments, Chair.
We can close public comment. And do we have a motion to pass on the recommendations from the last committee as
So moved.
the second? Second. Thank you. Can we get a vote?
Motion to pass on the recommendations from the previous committee as written. Seat number 8, Chair Jamalian, do you vote?
Aye.
Seat number 9, Vice Chair Adam Hayes, how do you vote? Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 12, Jukari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nagales Valley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Aye.
With 7 ayes and 0 nays, the motion passes.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 8, previously 10. Moving on to agenda item number 9, approval of bylaws amendment. And if you remember, we discussed that legacy operators should be included in the language of social equity. I think after your presentation, it definitely confirmed the hunch to do that. So I think we were all aligned with that. So I would go directly to public comment on that point unless any member has issues with other language. Then we can open public comment.
For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of the table to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. First option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494-753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is now open and I will read your comments as they come in. We have no comments here in person. We do have one individual attempting to comment online. I do believe we resolved our technical issues. My apologies to this commenter. Also, it's possible this commenter may comment on a different item.
That's fine.
That's totally fine. Again, my sincerest apologies to this commenter. You are ready to unmute and speak when you are.
Can you hear me?
Can you speak up a little?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right, perfect. Hey, hey, this is Ed, one of the owners of Poncho Brothers Storefront Retail. I've been trying to comment for a while, as you guys know. My first comment was really just, the initial public comment was just really something really for the Office of Cannabis to consider and maybe the committee to come under. As you guys know, cannabis is being descheduled or potentially being descheduled. I think it should be taken off the federal scheduling thing anyway. But I was hoping to propose an idea to Nikesh and his office to create some marketing material that would inform business owners what the potentials of partnering with cannabis companies, to be able to do more marketing, more cross marketing to where they felt comfortable on being able to partner with us. We've tried pretty unsuccessfully to partner with schools, local hotels, and everybody is under this threat of federal, federal persecution. And I would just like to propose for Nikesh to create some wording that business owners could use to be able to feel a little bit more comfortable on partnering with cannabis companies. Nikesh, probably as you know, there are amendments at the federal level, the Rohrabacher Amendment, which allows, some protection from us. It's not fully guaranteed, but it does allow the Department of Justice to not have to use funds to go after legal states like California. So really, that's just like an exploratory comment. Just wanted to kind of propose that to see if this office could make something that makes it easier for us to have normal business contracts, right? Limited contracts. I just read that Spotify and a large company, multi-state operator, just did a deal together to be able to do radio ads. So, you know, it's out there and the things are there. But just looking at us here in San Francisco, I would love to see more, you know, operations where we could, you know, make contracts together with local business operations, whether they're gyms or saunas or art galleries, and really just be able to promote, you know, our cannabis operations with each other. The second comment I wanted to make was I just wanted to applaud you guys as an office for all the data and all the research that you guys have done to really make informed decisions. I feel that we have the best best regulatory body in the country. You guys have been solid since the start, going way back to Nicole Elliott's time, and you guys have just been solid. I'm glad you kept Ray on the Office of Cannabis. He's been really consistent, and people like Evelyn and Princess, you guys have done really good. Jorge, I see you out there. You know, you guys have been putting in really good people and just really making it easier for us as operators to stay in business. I just completed my renewal. It was a really easy process. And so I just want to thank your office again for all the hard work that you guys do. And you guys really don't get enough credit, as you guys should be, you know, as being a really strong, you know, public government body. So that was that other comment. And the third comment I wanted to make was just around the medical cannabis. I also think the city can make marketing material around just public notice that there are medical options for people to be able to get their medical ID card and to be able to support that legislation. If I'm not mistaken, maybe you guys might know, but I believe there is a sunset date on the medical marijuana at the state level. So at some point, either that might be renewed or not might be taken away from patients. So I would love to see the city just keep continuing to create new dialogue in the Office of Cannabis. I know I saw your workload with permitting, and I know where you guys are at on that workload, but I would love to see a shift in you guys being in office to make public statements, to be able to let the consumers and people know in San Francisco who we are. You know, no different than SF Travel or some other organizations in the city who make public statements. Would love to see you guys be able to do that and to really move from not just being a regulatory body, but also more of like an outspoken body for just us as cannabis here in San Francisco. I heard there was a comment about you guys are working on the event, some new ordinance or new legislation around the events. I think the pilot program has been long enough. I think it's time to open that up to new events. As you guys know, only existing.
And my apologies, I'm gonna have to cut you there. And
Do we have any more public comment?
we have no other public comment at this time.
Closing public comment. Do we have a motion to approve the bylaws as amended?
Motion.
Thank you. Can we get a vote on the motion, please?
Motion to approve the bylaws as amended. Seat 8, Chair Jamalian, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 9, Vice Chair Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 12, Jakari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nogales-Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
How did we skip to approval of bylaws when we were talking about the recommendations in medical cannabis? Did we vote on that?
We did.
Yes.
We did, okay, my bad, all righty. Aye. Thank you. Happened so quick.
All right, with 7 ayes and 0 nays, the motion passes.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 9. Moving on to the election of our racial equity lead. I believe the OC explained in our last meeting what that position entails. It is essentially somebody representing our committee to other committees and commissions. think we can open up for discussion. I personally would like to see Antoinette hold that position. And I would, with that, open up for discussion.
We can essentially conduct this in the same way that we conducted the votes for the chair, person and vice chairperson. So somebody would need to second a nomination and we can do it by vote of, show of hands. There's also the opportunity for anyone to speak if they'd like to.
I would like to nominate Antoinette.
If I could second that, that'd be great.
And then we would open up for public comment before we vote.
Yes, yes.
So could we go to public comment?
Great.
Do you accept that? Do you
Accept the nomination.
Accept the nomination, Antoinette?
You set me up. No, I was for, yeah, sure, thank you. I accept.
Okay. We will go to public comments. For members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of the table if you'd like to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have two options to provide public comments at this time. The first option is call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494-753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. And just as a reminder to all members of the public, we are back to the point where comments should be reserved to the specific agenda item now that we've resolved our technical issues. I see no one initiated a public comment in person. I have no public comments coming in online.
Awesome. We'll close public comments and go to vote.
All right, the motion for member Antoinette Mobley to serve as the racial equity lead for the Cannabis Oversight Committee. Seat number 8, Chair Jamalian, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat number 9, Vice Chair Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 12, Jukari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nogales Sally, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Hi.
With 7 ayes and 0 nays, the motion passes.
Gee, thank you guys.
Brings us to the public banking recommendation point, agenda item number 11. This is born from the movement that we have in the city right now for a public bank, but also looking at the general size of the public bank that's currently being discussed. I think it would take years for us to get cannabis into that. So the idea is to have a public bank that's dedicated to cannabis banking, because we all need access to banking services. We're one of the most innovative cities in the world, and we're behind Marin County when it comes to cannabis banking. North Bay Credit Union, Salal Credit Union out of Oregon. There's all these states that already are counties that are already banking, and yet we don't have a cannabis bank while we're pushing our social equity program, which is supposed to lower the barrier for entry. So as we all know, that's making it really difficult to operate in a highly regulated market. While many MSOs enjoy banking services provided by some of the bigger banks, those two are not really safe, as we saw with the collapse of Urban and East West Bank and MasterCard pulling their transactional services. So given that San Francisco currently has more than, I had 50, but 40 social equity licensees that have created jobs and are almost exclusively from underserved communities, I feel it is time for a public bank that will offer commercial banking services to licensed cannabis companies. And in light of the OSC's report and 36 months runways, which to your point, a lot of them are created by business problems, by funding problems, by lack of access to capital. So priority should be given to social equity and legacy businesses as amended in our code. However, in the spirit of promoting our city and attracting tenants to the downtown area, I also suggest opening accounts for cannabis license holders, provided that they rent a minimum of space and have a minimum number of employees in the city. That could potentially attract national cannabis companies to come in and headquarter here, sort of like what Delaware does for corporations. Like, we should be the HQ of national cannabis companies. I've prepared a rough recommendation for our review, and hopefully my fellow committee members will help me wordsmith this so we can get a vote on this and pass it on to the mayors and supervisors. The recommendation that I want to make is that the city of San Francisco shall accept and fund a public cannabis bank in accordance with the California Public Bank Act, which allows municipalities to establish public banks that will use the deposits to make loans that directly benefit local communities. Priority should be given to social equity and legacy businesses. However, in the spirit of promoting, we should also allow cannabis license holders nationwide to participate, as long as they rent a minimum amount of space in San Francisco and employ San Francisco residents. We recommend a minimum threshold of 1,200 square feet and 2 full-time employees for out-of-town cannabis companies to qualify for a San Francisco Public Cannabis Bank. We recommend the city of San Francisco work closely with the Cannabis Oversight Committee to define the eligibility criteria, community benefits, and funding for such bank. The San Francisco Cannabis Bank shall render all services traditionally offered to small businesses in accordance with the regulations set forth by the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. These services shall include but not be limited to business checking with interest, merchant services, treasury management, money and market accounts, business credit cards, automated clearinghouse access, online banking, account software integration, payroll services, retirement, and health savings. I'd love your input on this. That's how it stands as it is. I can pass around a printout if you want to look at it and read it.
Are you able to share that with us?
Well, I think because of the Brown Act, I wasn't going to share it to this meeting, but now we can share it, and you're more than welcome to take a look at it. I'll start.
It's 1,200 square feet.
I don't know, you can have it in my chicken spread. Yes.
Where did you get the minimum threshold of 1,200 square feet?
I just kind of looked at it as around what kind of like business share spaces or small offices are available downtown. And it seemed like there was a lot of between 800 and 2,000, so it's kind of arbitrary. But also in light of recommending 2 people, you can't really have them sit in a 3,000 square foot office.
So this recommendation would be to establish a San Francisco public cannabis bank. And this is, I just want to make sure this is under the Gavin Newsom sign 2019, right? My question is, have any other municipalities, has anyone else come online with one of these? Or so we would be the first?
Yes.
Okay.
I talked to the San Francisco Fire Credit Union in my capacity as a business owner about 1.5 years ago. And they were actually doing some cannabis banking before their CO was changed. And it was an internal decision to not do it. And as a lot of us know, Monterey Credit Union, North Bay Credit Union, these are all credit unions that are doing business for us and charging us quite a bit of money to run our accounts. So clearly there is a path. It's just that we chose not to go that.
I'm just wondering, like, I'm definitely all for this. I'm wondering what we could do to set this up for success.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Right.
That's why we're having this discussion.
So I guess the first question I have is like, okay, so it says fund a public cannabis bank. Where does that funding come from?
Well, I do believe it has to come, the initial funding has to either come from the city budget.
Okay.
So deposits are received and obviously, returns are made. But that is part of funding the bank. And if you look at how they want to fund the public general bank that's in discussion, that would also come out of the city budget. That's why I think it's important. We recommend it to BOS and the mayor's office. And it would be nice to have the data of how much payroll taxes we pay as an industry, how many people we employ, what is our gross revenue. But obviously, we first have to start this conversation. And that's why in there, I do say that they need to work closely with the oversight committee to determine these criteria.
I'll make a quick note. We do have some of that data. It's very incomplete because it's operator submitted, and that will be part of the second part of the annual report.
Well, and looking at the last controller's office's report, that data is not accurate. We need really accurate self-reporting from the companies that want accounts, because that's ultimately, you do give your bank your gross revenue and they do see what you make. So I think when you really come to that threshold, we will get much more accurate data than the city controller's office has, but it has to be voluntary.
How how long does it take to get an updated controllers?
About a year on.
Okay, never mind, never mind.
But it's not, that data really doesn't represent the actual volume of money that would flow through that bank. It's quite a bit. If I look at that, we have 116 licensees, even if most of them just hover around $1 million a year, which most of them don't, they're far above that. It's over $100 million a year revenue. That's significant.
I saw just online that there's a, I don't know if this is something you've heard of, the California Public Banking Alliance, which is like this group of people from regional public banking advocacy, evangelists from LA, San Francisco, the East Bay. I noticed Jackie Fielder's name is on here. She's someone that we know like locally. My question is, do we want to maybe like talk to like other groups in the state that are looking to do something like this and kind of get them on board with like maybe take ideas from them, or?
I think we should get ideas from anyone we can that has any sort of experience
Right,
with this subject. Again, we're all, often we're the first to do something. So
right.
Nikesh can tell you, and we have to figure it out. Just seeing that there is an appetite for a public bank, and I have reached out to a couple of supervisors and asked them what their appetite for that is, and I believe there is support.
Okay.
So I think it's up to us to word it correctly to give it a realistic chance of making it through several bodies.
Yeah, I definitely think the data piece that you were talking about, Chair Jamalian, I think that would be a huge improvement to this recommend, because it's really hard to fight with numbers when you take it to the board. So I don't know, is there a way to like take what you were talking about, Scott, that we have and try to fold it in?
I think we should probably include the number of permittees that would benefit from this. But I also just, in our experience with recommendations going out of this committee, once the recommendation goes out, that's when the conversation starts.
Okay.
And the recommendation certainly won't be taken into legislation that way.
Got it.
So there'll still be an opportunity to provide legislative verbiage to
Okay.
the supervisor at the mayor's office.
Cool.
It's more of an aspirational recommendation that can then be followed up with actual granular propositions.
Got it.
I'm very ignorant to this, but why would we not want to latch on the public bank that's going right now?
Just from my understanding, it's gonna be a very long process because that bank is supposed to serve all underserved communities in the city. So it'll just be from purchasing homes to small businesses. And I'm not sure that they would want to associate with cannabis and jeopardize their success based on cannabis. And that's also because, I'm from the industry and I've been treated really unfairly by banks the whole time. So, I'm just looking also at the composition of that board. It's a lot of people from traditional finance coming over. So we need people from credit unions, from, fair trade banks like Umwa and stuff. Like we need input from nonprofit banks. That's really what.
I'm on board.
But we're here to discuss, please ask all your questions. I'm sure it's not a perfect concept, it needs a lot of work.
Being a legacy operator and understanding the complications with banking and frustrations there are, I just wonder, like having a bank sounds awesome, especially when it doesn't cost thousands of dollars a month just to have a debit card. However, I just know it's such a big issue all over the place with the banking, and I hate to be like the devil's advocate, but like, is this even something that could ever even happen on a small scale? Like, I would just hate to waste our time on.
No, it's a long shot.
I
I don't
Such
think
a
that's
long
a fair
shot,
question.
and it's like, I know small credit unions, like I have a bank out of Monterey that's, robs me every month to keep my money, but, I would love to have normal banking where I'm not, like I have a debit card, we were talking about it before, where I had to fight to get a limit, a daily spending limit over $1,500. I have a business, I spend a lot more than that in a month. And so, yeah, I got my limit raised. However, I'm on the hook for any fraudulent charges or anything. I'm a small business owner. So it's like someone steals my card and runs $6,500, I'm out, you know, like that's my money. Like, there's no protection. So having protection would be awesome. Being able to gain interest on the money that I fund the bank would be awesome, but it's such a big issue.
I
wonder
think there's a
if
business
you
case to be made. Yes, I do think there's a business case to be made. We've done recommendations out of this committee with much less hope and they move forward. A lot of it comes
I'm
down,
new to all this. so
a
I'm
lot of it
trying
has
to-
just kind of comes down to how strong we as a committee, through the advocacy part, once the recommendation is out. That really, how good are we at mobilizing, getting public comment in favor of it, getting people to call their supervisor and say, we want this for our community.
As far
That's
as
up to
data, I don't
us.
think
So,
there's any cannabis operator in the city that wouldn't happily hand over information to help support this stuff.
I agree, and I'm sure we can come up with certain kind of non-disclosure agreements or even ways to sanitize those submissions so you can't tell from whom they are.
Yeah.
But we need to get the ball rolling. But it really comes down to our efforts as a committee. And the success of every recommendation is based on that. And again, I'll always use the retail ban example. That was really good advocacy work on the side of the Retail Alliance. They did a very good job making their point, doing the advocacy, and suddenly it was codified. So, that's up to us.
Does it make sense because, like Adam is saying, there's more than one effort right now happening towards solving this problem that's very specific to the cannabis industry? Does it make sense to maybe add something to the recommendation that says, all right, like we want, you know, the government in San Francisco to move forward with looking at this and having this conversation, but we also recognize and, you know, we want the city to support, you know, federal legislation that would open up cannabis
Well,
banking?
I've learned that we gotta keep local, state, and
Okay.
federal separate.
Yeah.
Because then it's just three different, completely different, you know, sets of problems that each one of those deals with.
Mhm.
And they don't really impact each other in terms of, well, they're not coordinated. They do impact each other, but they're not
Mhm.
coordinated by any means. Federal legalization will, if you look at the timelines, and, you know, this came up several times now with the declassification or the reclassification of cannabis, we kind of need to get ahead of that. Because when cannabis gets reclassified, you're gonna have access to capital, but not us, big ag will have, big tobacco, big pharma, because they already work with the DEA. And the descheduling will be fully in the hand of the DEA to decide who gets a federal permit and who doesn't. So in light of that, we won't be able to compete with the kind of capital influx that might be 6, 7, 8 years down the road. I also don't think federal legalization is gonna be that quick. But in light of that, an ecosystem for at least our industry, we're talking about regular banking services, which includes looking at your revenue, looking at your profitability. But I can't get a loan to buy my building, but a restaurant that probably does the same amount of revenue could get a loan to buy the building. So for me, it's more about offering business service, banking services to healthy businesses that currently have a hard time getting it. And the 114 licensees in the city, if they're doing business and are still in business, they're doing something right, because it's very difficult. So that community deserves to be banked properly.
Yeah.
That's really what it's
Yeah.
about.
Is banking such an issue that if this did happen, 100% of the businesses would move money to that?
I would say 95 of them would move there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at my recommendation, I go even further and say, we will attract businesses nationally to come and do this. And that's really, you know, where I think we can set a hook that's different than what the public bank is doing. And that's when you can rally, hopefully, landlords, building owners, operators around it. That was sort of, you know, when I was talking to those friends that are in hedge funds, and I was like, what would make this interesting for you guys? I hope renting some square footage would be a good start. So I do think it has potential. I do think with the Massachusetts bank that just was announced today that they're now offering national banking services to cannabis companies out of Florida. So clearly there is going to be a trend with just federal descheduling on the horizon already, right? It's going to cause a trend. So we just don't want to be running behind. But Shay, please add to the recommendation and reword it as you are probably are going to give the wordsmith here.
No, I mean, I like it. I,
ChatGPT wrote this.
yeah, right. It's a very generative AI. No, I think that, I'm definitely all in favor of this. I just wanna like give us the most, strength that we can, right? And so I'm just thinking about like in terms of like, if we'd be the first, like you were saying, Ali, about having like credit unions, like look at this with us, right? And there are definitely credit unions that take cannabis account holders, so, like maybe we can ask them, like, what are the, policies and procedures that, make sense for, a public bank that would be specific I mean, we can take in, some kind of like, not just public comment, but like expert input, and maybe some like timelines. Is that something that we could put in the recommendation? Like, like you're pointing out, Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is gonna unfold over the coming months. We've got that, cannabis banking bill in Congress that's just kind of sitting there, hasn't really gone anywhere. I don't know if it's gonna get, signed into law this year. Can we, ask the Board of Supervisors here to, give us some, give us a, report on, these.
What do you think of asking for a working group?
Right?
Asking for the supervisor. I'm just,
Yeah.
my main thing is I don't want to slow down the process.
Mhm.
So it's more like get something in and then we can expand on that and build upon it. That's really where that's why I kind of kept it general. So it does allow us to keep adding to it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but our recommendations get posted for a certain amount of time before they're then passed on to the Board of Supervisors. Right? Or when we decide to make a recommendation, usually there's still a lag between making the recommendation and actually disseminating it to the.
It depends, right? If the committee wants to expedite or they can be sent over, if the committee doesn't, then we typically do it over it just depends on the particular issue, what else is being. If there's desire for a timeline, we can generally accommodate that. I will say, you made a good point about things like this, any recommendation, it goes as far as the committee is willing to engage, right? So if we can send a recommendation, it doesn't necessarily mean that any action will be taken unless there's follow-up as well. So that also controls the time.
And there's gonna be a pretty long period of having to educate every supervisor about it. Those will most likely be one-on-one conversations with a committee member that has a relationship with said supervisor or mayor's office. So I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I do know what you mean, but I think when you start bringing in expert opinions, that's also something that we don't know if other banks even want to engage with us yet, right? So I wouldn't necessarily wait for that to happen to move on a recommendation. I do think the strategy of executing the recommendation and putting the verbiage together, which would probably be in a future meeting and it would be agendized, that would be where we want to really get nitty gritty and granular and detailed.
And to the chair, I like your statement in terms of, or your comment you made to us about put the recommendation through, you see, because this is going to require a lot of research. I love research. I'm just saying, I've just been on here. There's a couple of banks already that are doing this type of banking. You got to look at how the Federal Reserve, you got to look at risks of even banking to this particular industry. So there's so many components to it. But if we put together a working group, on submitting just a general recommendations, hey, let's look into.
Well, we can do that under our own bylaws. We can do stuff. We can create a working group or sign up to 2 members to I think we've done that before.
You can certainly identify folks on this committee that are your point of contacts for particular recommendations. So if you were to identify 2 individuals as the representatives to have conversations with the mayor's office or the board of supervisors, you can do that.
Right.
It's just because of the Brown Act, you should not, and you would not be able to have conversations about what we're learning and then have them spread to more than 5 people.
Sure.
because that would create a form issue. Right? We don't have to post it. So you could certainly have two reps, they go, they have a conversation, and then they bring their findings to this committee.
Right.
And they don't share them with anyone else. I think that's fine. We can run that by Sarah as well, but.
Yeah, I think that's when we'll do some outreach to banks and get some data related and then present that to the committee to that, draft a verbiage for the record.
And Chair Jamal, I'm just sort of noting time.
Yeah, 10 to.
3:55.
Yeah. So I think unless we have anything else, I'll go to public comment before we put the recommendation to a vote.
For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of the table in order to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have two options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494-753-0648, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. If you have an individual here in person who'd like to make a public comment, please, sir, podium, go ahead.
Bram Goodwin. I totally support the public bank. And FYI, I had a conversation with Dean Preston, who has been the lead person on this, specifically about the cannabis bank possibility. And he seemed open to it. And just an FYI, Dean Preston will be at our Browning Mary Democratic meeting on October the 11th next month. And that is, the public bank was definitely one of the conversations that I informed him that we want to talk about. I do wonder, or just maybe a clarification from Ali, that the idea of, I hadn't heard this before, a separate bank. I would think, just politically, that it may make more sense that we would be folded into the bigger bank, where we were one little piece, rather than asking for something specific where I think we get a lot of attacks from people saying, these are drug dealers, blah, blah, blah. But if we're a one piece of a much bigger bank, I wonder if, again, from a political point, it would be eventually an easier take. But I think totally support what Ali, I'm impressed with in his outline. And I think the big thing is dialogue with the supervisor. I think there is an appetite if we bring the facts, and I think Ali's really put his finger on something important, which is dollar signs are what counts in these things. And I think bringing that to bear of what this total is significant. And it could be significant as far as a bigger bank. But I'd love to hear a little bit of the discussion of, strategy wise, whether separate is better or maybe as part or on the ask part, as part of the bigger public bank. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We have no comments online. We have no other comments in person.
That closes public comment, and we have a motion to adopt the recommendation. Do you need me to reread it, or can I give it to you in writing?
Yes, if you can send it to us digitally, and for now, say like the motion of the recommendation as, yeah.
So do we have a motion to adopt the recommendation as I read it into the record?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thanks. Can we get a vote?
The motion to adopt the recommendation around the public banking, recommendation to the Board of Supervisors as previously read into the record. Seat number 8, Chair Jamalian, how do you vote? Seat number 9, Vice Chair Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat number 11, Apollo Wallace, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 12, Jakari Donaldson, how do you vote? Seat 13, David Nogales Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Aye.
7 ayes and 0 nays, the motion passes.
Thank you. That concludes item number 11. Moving on to item number 12, scheduling next meeting and proposed future agenda items. I think, as usual, we will do a poll, right, to determine which Wednesday we will have this meeting. As for future agenda item, anybody has a comment or request, now is a good time before we open public comment. Right, go to public comment, please.
For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of the table to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have two options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2494-753-0648, and then press star 3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until your line is unmuted to begin your public comment. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. There are no in-person comments and I do not see any indication of digital comments.
Right, that concludes item number 12. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just like to.
Yeah, good job.
More sharp, right? More sharp.
Wow.